When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comics YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about what if Jon Snow had actually gone to help Robb and actually been successful. In the first book, what actually ends up happening is instead Jon is caught by his friends. He's brought back to the Wall, and that ends basically his entire arc of going to help Robb, because then he goes north of the Wall, and then he doesn't come back south for a bit of time, and by the time he gets back, Robb's pretty much screwed and or dead already. But before we do, I did want to say a massive thank you to my Patreons and members who support me on this channel. I appreciate you guys a lot. If you do want to become one, you do get videos early, and I also do give you guys an exclusive piece of content each week. But let's get into the video. So let's say that, just for the sake of argument in this video, that Jon makes it all the way to Robb without being caught. I think is already kind of a huge, don't know if that would occur. He'd somehow also have to get past Moat Cailin. And even if he got to Moat Cailin and let's say the soldiers just let him go, still, I mean, it still would have been kind of tough for him to actually get to Robb, who at the time of when, you know, let's say the journeying happens and Jon would have gotten to Robb, it's uncertain as to where he would have been. Robb could have likely already started his campaign in the west by the time Jon got there. And then it would have just been Catelyn, but Catelyn, maybe she was also already in the south as well. So the timing's kind of weird here, but let's just say that Jon meets up with Robb before he goes west. Let's say Jon really hustles and he gets there in time. Okay, so what does that change? And right off the bat, I've kind of been somebody that's pushed back on this idea in the past because I wasn't sure what it really could change. But the first thing that I think it would have changed, I think that Robb would not have slept with Jeyne. Because the thing that really is important to understand here is that when Robb sleeps with Jeyne, it's because he's extremely vulnerable. He's injured. He's found out the news that Bran and Rickon are dead, or he thinks they're dead anyway. That's the news coming from the north anyway. Theon has betrayed him. Everything's kind of coming crashing down for him right now. And so if Jon was there, somebody he would consider as a brother, I think that Jon, with Robb being there, would have been the person that Robb leaned on, not looking forward in Jeyne Westerling. So I think there's a possibility that he doesn't sleep with Jeyne Westerling. And so what does that do, right? Like, what does that then change? Because at the same time, by the time Jon would have maybe gotten to Robb, I think Robb already would have sent Theon to go to the Iron Islands. Now, maybe we can say that doesn't happen here, but would Jon have been able to convince Robb to not send Theon? I think it's debatable, given the fact that Catelyn and Robb are still pretty close here. Like, they hadn't had something that tore them apart to where Robb just isn't believing Catelyn. Like, Jaime isn't released until the end of this book. So I think in a lot of ways that still would go down. I think the Greyjoy stuff would still happen. I think Catelyn releasing Jaime is still pretty likely, and I think it's actually even more likely given the fact of how close Jon is to proximity with Robb, that I think because Catelyn looking at that going, oh yeah, Jon's kind of the likely person to step up and take over the rulership of the North if Robb is to fall in battle. I actually think it's quite likely that that happens again. I still think Catelyn releases Jaime. And so you come to this point where the Stark stuff still happens more than likely. Catelyn still releases Jaime. That still happens. So the only thing that truly changes is that the phrase, at least on face value, wouldn't like go away from Robb. Like, that relationship and that marriage pact would still be complete. And so there wouldn't be any situation of a red wedding, because there's no wedding that needs to be reestablished, because Robb is still going to be with the Frey girl. And remember, the wedding is not slated to happen until the war is over. So Robb maybe going back through the Twins to get to the north to break through the Greyjoys still probably occurs in this situation, but like, you still don't need a wedding. So it's like you couldn't even maybe feign a red wedding. Like, you couldn't even have it maybe at Robb and let's say Rosalind's wedding, then, you know, they could do a red wedding there. Still doesn't seem like it would happen because it's slated to happen at the very end of the war. Now, maybe Walder Frey pushes for it, right? Maybe Walder Frey, you know, they're coming back up north to try and free the north. He's like, hey, you're going to kind of abandon the Riverlands. We know before all this war goes down, all this stuff, we want you to marry Rosalind. you know, just in case something happens to you, so we at least have that, you know, secured alliance, or more or less. And that's when the Red Wedding happens. I just don't know if that's going to occur. I think Tywin might start trying it, right? I think Roose Bolton, someone realizing that this war is not going well, could also, you know, him and Tywin could be trying to figure out some situation in which they get Robb killed. It's possible, but I don't know how much sway Tywin would have, right? Because two of the major things would still happen, right? Like Jaime's release, huge blow, which then leads to, once again, the Karstark stuff, which then gets the Karstarks to turn away from Robb. And again, Jon is very similar to Robb. So I think that that still would have gone on. Like, I think still Lord Karstark would have been executed, regardless of Jon being there or not. So you come to this point where I think Robb would have just been allowed to go back up to reclaim the North. But at the same time, like, what does that really do for you? Because you're still in a very weakened state. Like, nothing else really changes, right? Like, for instance, Edmure still would have intersected the Lannister force from crossing back into the west, so they would have eventually gone south. They would have defeated Stannis. All that kind of goes the same way. Now, there is a bit of a difference in the North for one specific thing. Because Jon Snow is not at the wall, likely Samwell Tarly would have just been killed, basically worked to death, or you had nobody there to protect him, so Samwell Tarly could have died, which could have insane repercussions because he's one of the few people that actually kills a White Walker or another and knows, like, how they could be killed, for instance. So that could be really important. Sam also just is, you know, he's a great character and all that. But then you also have something else that's interesting, is because Ghost is the one that eventually finds, like, the hand that has the bodies that they actually bring to Castle Black in book 1 to kind of look at. That's what prompts, like, the other assassination attempt on Jeor Mormont. I don't know if they'd find the bodies. Probably not, given that Ghost was the only one that seemed to know where these bodies were and sensed them, or Bloodraven had some intervention here, whatever. So maybe that wouldn't happen. Maybe Jeor Mormont would still be in charge, but if these bodies aren't found and they're not resurrected, well, then maybe they don't go north of the wall because that's what prompts them to do so, which is actually, I think, very beneficial to the Watch. I think Jeor Mormont taking all of the Rangers, all of their best fighting men, majority of the Castle Black strength and the wall strength, and then going out of their element, abandoning their, like, advantage, kind of weird to me. That doesn't probably happen here. So I think Jeor Mormont's still in charge, still leading the wall. And so when Robb comes back up with Jon and they all, you know, defeat the Greyjoys, which I do think would eventually ended up happening, you're in a weird spot because Robb does not have the most amount of strength rallied behind him. Remember, he loses the Karstark forces. A lot of the Riverland forces would have stayed in the Riverlands. You also would have the Frey force probably would have stayed in the Riverlands as well. The Frey force is a weird one. They were kind of being used to try and, like, help break the, I guess, hold on Moat Cailin in the north. Who knows if the Frey forces then would have been sent back to the Twins, or they would have been kept up in the north, or if Robb would have just tried to make a new host with the forces available in the north to then, you know, try and defeat the Wildling force, because that was a thing that was occurring at this time. The Wildling attack on the wall, Jeor Mormont would have been sending out ravens for help and all that stuff. And so I think you actually come to a kind of a similar situation as you do in a lot of my other what ifs, is that Stannis and Robb end up coming together, and they are the two people that have to deal with the Wildling threat. And I think they end up making an uneasy alliance more than likely. But again, you still have kind of the same stuff kind of play out, right? You have Tywin and all that going on, and they have a pretty stable control over most of Westeros outside of the Riverlands and the North. The issue, once again, would have been, well, the Riverlands aren't strong enough to defeat the Reach and the Lannisters by themselves, while Robb and also Stannis are kind of dealing with stuff in the North. It would just a weird situation, right? Because you get to, okay, you know, Feast for Crows, for instance, and like the Dance of the Dragons part of the timeline. Okay, well, what happens then, right? The Lannisters and the Reach would have been marching on the River Lords, taking them out, basically, or putting them under siege. I don't know to what extent they could have fought them off or held them off, because eventually Daenerys is going to come over with probably young Griff at her side and the Golden Company, even more forces and all that. And I think that would have started the next war, right? You would have had Robb, Stannis, and a faction coming from the north. You would have had Daenerys from the east, and you would have had the Lannisters and the Reach from the south. So to me personally, I think it's a weird situation because I think Daenerys would have won, but I don't think Stannis would have bent the knee to Daenerys, whereas I think Robb would have seen the wisdom in that, and he would have. And so I think Stannis dies more than likely to Daenerys when she comes over, and I think Robb bends the knee, similar to, you know, like Torrhen Stark back in the day with Aegon. But the problem would be here, you don't really know how to defeat the others. The wall is even less prepared for a threat of the others and has zero proof to their actual really existence at all because Jon was not at the wall. So I think you're in a weird situation where when the others do come, if they do at all, is even more in a sticky situation because they're not aware of them as they are kind of more as in the main story in the north anyway. So in my opinion, what happens here, right? Because another part of this is the Horn of Winter that we believe is with Samwell, the broken horn, is never found because Sam is dead, and also Jon was the one that kind of found it. So yeah, you're coming to a weird situation where how would the others then get through the wall, or would they at all? And then you come to this weird position where maybe you just have a standoff, right? Where you basically anything north of the wall is dead. Anyone that goes north of the wall is basically just going into White Walker land and they instantly die. I don't know. This theory or this what if kind of gets to the end of it, and it's just like, who knows, right? But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.